everybody to the Otherbound book presentation. I'm very happy to see you all. I'm very happy that well, we can host this event. As an English language bookstore in the Netherlands, you always have the fact that there's an ocean between well, the office and the books there. You sell them. So when we have a book signing, it's always a special occasion. But today it's actually a very special occasion because we have a local author. It doesn't happen that often that well, Dutch writer is published by an English publisher. So it's a very exciting event, and I'm very happy that we can host this event. The moderator today will be Julie Phillips. She's a book critic for Trouw. Yeah. I would like to ask Julie to come up.
One of the most interesting things about it, this remarkable book really, is you know, the thing about imaginary worlds is that it's not easy to get there. It's not always physically difficult if you happen to have a wardrobe handy or a mirror that you can step through. But when people in books travel between real and imaginary worlds, there's often trouble at the boundary. How do you cross the distance from what you know to what's completely strange? In Otherbound, Corinne Duyvis takes this trouble at the boundary and uses it to talk about problems of difference and of empathy and of power, troubles that are at the boundary between self and other. One of her main characters, Nolan Santiago, is a teenage boy who travels too easily between worlds. Every time he blinks, he finds himself in the Dunelands and in the mind of somebody else, a servant girl named Amara. In Nolan's world, at the same time, these episodes appear to be like seizures or hallucinations. Everybody thinks it's an illness. Rich world building, convincing non-heteronormative relationships, balanced class issues, and nuanced, ethnically diverse characters add to the novel's depth. The well-paced action builds towards an unexpected, thrilling conclusion that will leave readers eager for more from this promising new author. Original and compelling, a stunning debut. And another reviewer said, "This is how you do fantasy in a global world." Corinne herself is a queer, autistic artist and writer who grew up in Amsterdam, graduated from art school, writes in English, loves superheroes, comic books, and online fandom, and campaigns for more diversity in children's literature. Please welcome the author of Otherbound.
Hi. So this is really cool because I've done a few of these readings now in the United States, and that's all. You know, usually the United States is the more exciting thing because, you know, it's all the way across the Atlantic Ocean, and it's this huge market and so many people, and it's very glamorous, and it was amazing. But for some reason, this one had me so nervous because, you know, this is my home. The American Book Center is a store that I've been visiting for over 10 years. I think I remember coming in there when I was still in the old location. You had to go up the stairs to find all the comic books, and I got like an Invader Zim shirt there when I was 14. So I kind of grew up there, and now I'm here as an author, and there are like 1 million copies of my book in that store window, which I may have tried to take a picture of the other day, and someone was in the way, so I was like, okay, cool. Well, now he's going to turn around, he's going to see me, he's going to recognize me, and I'll be famous. Well, actually, he turned around and was like, oh, sorry, you walked away. But still, it's still pretty exciting. I'd like to read a little bit. And for this reading, I need a lovely assistant. So this is a scene from the first chapter. Nolan had the ambitious idea of going to the Walgreens to buy some things. And then Amara wakes up, and he's back to getting dragged in her world every single time he blinks. Nolan took a pack of pens from the rack, then bent to help pick up the fallen notebooks. His eyes started to ache, but he couldn't allow himself to blink. He knew what Amara was facing. Blinking meant he would have to face it too. He needed to hide. "Could you point me to a bathroom?" he asked the sales clerk. He couldn't keep his eyes open any longer. They burned. He blinked, and for that fraction of a second, Amara sucked him in.
Flames crackled in the room's fire pit, and Amara made a sound that barely escaped her lips.
But then Nolan was back. He blinked a couple more times, too rapidly to get anything but flashes of heat and fear. The fire was getting closer. Something had happened to Jorn. Nolan hadn't seen him this outraged in years. He'd hit Amara often enough, but like this? No. Nolan held the plastic-wrapped notebooks so firmly they shook. The sales clerk was staring at him. If she'd answered his bathroom question, he'd missed it. "I'll get your mother," she said. His mother? How'd she find his mother? But the clerk was gone before he could respond, and Nolan gritted his teeth. He spun around. Finding a bathroom would take too long. He would find a place to hide in the parking lot instead. He couldn't break down in the store. He couldn't make a scene. Another blink. Nolan went from stalking through the aisles to
Drags along, legs tangled and kicking.
And when his eyes opened and he snapped back to his own world, he stumbled. His prosthetic foot slid out from under him before he could get a grip. Nolan caught himself on the nearest rack, sending metal rattling against metal. "Nolan?" His mother's voice. Nolan stiffened. There she stood, short and thin, wearing an ill-fitting Walgreens uniform and a name tag that proclaimed her Maria. Despite everything, that caught Nolan's eye. Mom was a childcare professional. She had training, certificates, her own business. What was she doing here? "Are you okay?" Mom asked. I need a space." Nolan tried a mom smile and failed. "Is he going to have a seizure?" The sales clerk stood behind Mom, her eyes as wide as Nolan's own probably were, but for entirely different reasons. She dug around in her pockets for her cell phone. "I'll call 911. "No," Mom bit out. "They can't help. Is the back room free?" The next time Nolan blinked, flames licked at Amara's hands. He muffled a scream. He found himself bent over, the notebooks in his hand creasing. "Let me go," he thought at Amara, although she didn't hear him, and she never would. This was a one-way street. She didn't know Nolan existed, let alone what her magic did to him. "Please, stop pulling me in. I don't want to feel this." He wanted to tune her out. Even with his eyelids spread wide, the aftertaste of her pain clung to his hands, and more than anything, he wanted to tune her out. On their own, the images he got through blinking were chaos, like switching between TV channels and catching only a half word here, a bright shape there, enough to wreak havoc on his concentration, but nothing more. Get enough of them, though, and he had two movies playing alongside each other, and no way of pressing pause. A group of curious shoppers watched from a distance. There weren't many, given that it was a Sunday morning, but enough to make him wish for the parking lot despite the risk. He'd lost one foot already. If Amara made him stumble onto the road, who knew what would come next? He should have stayed home. He should have asked Mom or Dad to pick up the notebooks while getting groceries. Serve him right for thinking he could handle anything on his own. Mom wrapped her arm around his shoulders and guided him to the back room, where he slammed his ass to the floor and pressed himself against the wall. He managed a tight nod in thanks as Mom clicked on a table fan, which whirred and stuttered into action. She pushed aside chairs and boxes, anything he might hurt himself on. Standard seizure procedure, even though there was nothing standard about his seizures. Nolan managed to open the zipper of his backpack, then grabbed his current notebook and the pen clipped to its cover. He should write down what he saw. Writing always helped. "I'm here, all right," Mom said, in Spanish now, her voice soothing. "I'm taking an early lunch break. We'll go home the moment you can. I'm right here." Every time he blinked, the sear of pain, the smell of burning flesh. Already, sweat was beading on his forehead. The pain lingered after he opened his eyes, his brain still shouting panic messages of "fire, fire, fire," before catching up. Nolan's hands were intact, Nolan's world safe. Until he blinked again. He couldn't hold on to the pen. His hands squeezed his chest until they were all that remained.
Tell us a little bit about Amara, since we know a little bit now about who Nolan is.
She has the ability to heal from any injury pretty much instantaneously. She's like a little Wolverine. But when you're a servant, that means you don't get to be a superhero. Instead, you have to use that power to protect your princess. In this case, the princess is cursed. And every time Amara has to protect the princess and save her life, Amara has to endure hellish pains. And this has been going on since she was a child. So her life is not too great. She's not currently on the run with the princess, and another servant, and their caretaker, who you met in the first chapter. He's not a very nice guy.
So which was harder to write, the Dunelands or Arizona?
Probably the Dunelands, because I had to do all that world building. But I'm also cheating here because I did not do all that much research for Arizona. I was kind of just winging it. It's like, oh, I'll do that research later. I need to write the book first. And I never actually ended up doing that, which is kind of terrible because last month I had my very first Skype chat with a book club who'd read the book. And it was a book club in Arizona. So I kind of watched everywhere. They're like, oh, they're going to tear me to bits and pieces. It actually turned out that they actually recognized a lot of it, which is great because the only thing that I included there was like, it's really hot. I'm like, it's really hot. Apparently that's enough to form Arizona, so that was pretty great. I'll actually, for the people who haven't read the book yet, there's a cool little fantasy map in there that my publisher did, which is really exciting to me because it's not a fantasy book until I have a cool fantasy map. I'm sure for everybody. The thing is, so I built this entire world, right, with all these different people. I can tell you exactly what it's like here in the culture and what kind of language they speak or what I based it on. And, you know, there's islands here and different climates. And then you zoom in on this little part here. And on this zoomed in little part, the entire book takes place on that island and on that city. So it's a really, really tiny part of the world. But in order to realistically convey that and all the different people who live there, I did make frequent references to the rest of the world, because that would be their reality. So I think that's mostly it makes the world feel more real and fleshed out, and I thought it was important to acknowledge that because that's the way the world is.
Yeah. What does it mean for readers, do you think, to have more disability in literature?
Well, for me, for example, I had a lot of problems with school and everything because of my autism, but I wasn't diagnosed until I was 14. And before that, school was basically my worst nightmare, and I ended up dropping out when I was 14 because I couldn't handle it anymore. And I think if I'd read like well done, realistic portrayals of autism when I was younger, I might have recognized myself in it, and we would have just figured that out sooner. I have a friend who's in a wheelchair. She's got gosh, I forget the actual condition, but it's a muscle condition, muscular atrophy, I think it is, and she has never seen anyone like her in fiction, and for her growing up, she's mentioned that it just completely wrecks your self-image, because if you don't see anyone like you, or they're only there as objects of pity, or they get miraculously healed at the end of the book and that's portrayed as something good, you're left wondering, why am I not in this world? Why am I never a main character? What is wrong with me? Am I fundamentally broken? People do think that. When you have these discussions about disability, and I have these discussions quite a lot because I run a website that is all about disability in young adult literature, people will say, well, why would you want to read about disabled characters? They're broken. You know, we want to read about heroes and who can you know, save the world, and nobody wants to read about people who are damaged. But when that's your life, you're not damaged. That's just the way you are. And people adapt a lot. And I know quite a few disabled people, and none of them sit around all day going like, gosh, I wish I were not disabled. You deal, you cope, you make your life. And most of them will be probably, you know, I think most of them could save the world if they were given an opportunity to. So I think that's important for disabled readers to be able to see that, and particularly for disabled children. And for other people, I think it's important to see disabled characters in these roles. Also to fight that narrative of disabled people are broken, disabled people are just here to be pitied, and all disabled people are fundamentally unhappy. Because that's what you get from the way our world is right now. That's the way it is. And that's in fiction particularly, but also media narratives, what you see in the news and the newspapers, that shapes so much of how we see the world. Like when I got diagnosed with autism, I was like, well, that sucks. I mean, I was happy at the time because it gave me a reason to kind of be a fuck up. But at the same time, I was like, well, but this is not going to get better. I'm broken. Now I'm sick. Well, crap. But okay, I'm gonna cope just fine. But I'm never, But it took me a lot of years to go like, okay, well, I don't necessarily have to be broken. I can just be different, and that doesn't have to be a bad thing. And I think that's so important to put that in your fiction so that it reflects the way the world is and the way people actually see themselves and think about themselves. Van jou? Ja. En je naam was met gewoon Emma en
Ja, maar als je
Okay, so just so you want to set it on me? It's useful. Yeah. Should I write happy birthday in one or is that? Yeah. Hopefully leave your last name started differently. Yeah, okay, good. I hope you both like the book. Sorry dat hij daar even sterk is. Dank je.
Dank je wel.
Hij zegt het nooit gezien.
Nee, ik word heel altijd voor het mooie applaus.
Mooie hele etalage. Erin.
Oké, ja, dat is weer op. Oké, cheese. Ja, oké, nog even voor de zekerheid.